Yes, hello once again, welcome back to Classic Dirt Bike TV, where we continue our journey looking at more of those old school vintage classics from way back in the day. Now we're going to continue next with episode 2 of our Mega Maicos series, so without any further delay, let's jump straight into our first machine. And so the first bike that we're going to take a look at in this second episode of our Mega Maicos series is multiple twin shock champion Paul Chiappa's 1981 490. Now again, Paul's bike's not a fully original machine because it does have a remanufactured frame and many other up-to-date Maico racing parts, all from various different suppliers. But to say that this bike is quick would be an understatement in the extreme, because Paul's already won the Scottish Twin Shock Championship on this bike multiple times, and even here in 2023 he's still racing this bike on the track and continues to be in the top 2 or 3 riders in the big open twin shock class. And as you can see, the motor is a 490 piston port engine with that big Bing carburetor to feed it with its fuel. But Paul also has another identical bike to this one that has the reed valve motor in the chassis, and he tends to switch between the two depending on what kind of track layout that he's riding on and the current track conditions. But the frame is a modern interpretation of the Mega 2 81 chassis, and as I remember, these chrome plated frames were supplied by Bill Brown at Wolfsport, and many of the bike's other parts like the slimline plastic fuel tank, the seat and side panels are more quality items from Bill Brown's Wolfsport Emporium. Now, when it comes to the front forks on Paul's Maico, you can almost guarantee that inside these stanchions there are some nice trick internals, as Paul, at the time I grabbed these pictures, was using parts from K-Tech suspensions to beef them up and make major improvements to their basic stock standard settings. Because if you're a top rider, you certainly want the best parts fitted onto your bike, and it's no secret that Paul certainly knows his way around motocross suspensions, classic or modern, and the knowledge and the skills that he has for this kind of older suspension system is second to none. And so at the back of Paul's bike, it was a pair of Swedish Öhlins piggyback shocks, which again have been dismantled and brand new internals fitted inside to customise them to Paul's own racing preferences and riding style. And although some people say that these Öhlins shocks are great just straight out of the box, these units that are fitted onto this 81 490 have been improved even further, so you can be sure that these are near enough among some of the best shocks fitted to an old twin shock racer. And as you can see, the original steel swing arm that would have been bolted onto this 490's now been removed, and this modern style alloy replacement has been bolted in as a substitute. And as far as I can remember, this was also another Bill Brown Wolfsport item, but although it's made of lighter, softer alloy, it certainly still looks strong enough to cope with anything that this bike will encounter on the track, regardless of how rough it will be. Although without doubt, just even looking at this bike standing still, you can see that it's a beast of a machine with a well-proven track record of wins and at least 15 Scottish twin shock titles that I personally know about to its name. And if you've been lucky enough to see this bike in action on the track, then you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, because this is no ordinary 490 Maico, and in terms of its Scottish heritage, it's an absolute legend among twin shock race bikes. Okay, so for our next Maico classic, it's the turn of David Bateman's quite nice 1974 AW250, which is another good example of the iconic machines that the legendary German racer Adolf Wheel rode way back in the early 1970s, where he gained legendary status in his home country, winning 14 German motocross titles riding for the Maico factory. But although he never actually managed to win any major international race events in his native Germany, he still achieved godlike status, and he even had these AWs named after him. But as I said, another lovely example of one of these early AW250s, and David's bike looks like it's in good original condition, despite it having maybe upgraded shocks on the back and a couple of other non-original items, like maybe this Japanese Mikuni carburetor instead of one of the older Bing carbs. But then again, you have to expect a few non-stock parts on a bike that's clocking on to almost 50 years old now. But these old AWs are still highly competitive in the 250 twin shock class, as long as you take your time to set them up right and get the right rider in the saddle. And these older AW250s are still quite popular choices to race at classic and vintage race events, especially in the pre-75 or maybe pre-78 classes, because even for 1974 these bikes still had quite a good handling chassis and a decent 250 motor that had this underslung exhaust expansion chamber, which was a bit prone to getting damaged from stones and other debris on the track. But certainly a trademark of these older AWs was this quite nice alloy fuel tank that always seemed to catch your eye if you were in any doubt at all about what kind of bike you were looking at. And again, in 1974 it would have been a basic pair of dampers that would have been fitted onto the back of our AW250, but as you can see here, David's fitted a much better pair of gas and oil piggybacks instead. But nevertheless, it's still quite good to see these earlier twin shock Maicos in and around the racing paddocks these days, and still taking part in classic racing. And this example here of David Bateman's was just about to take part in the Kendal Classic Revival Scramble event when I captured it in 2018. Now, just in contrast to our previous AW74 bike, we're now going to take a quick look at a relatively modern uptake on that original machine and take a look at Iain Clark's 1974 GP400, which is another blinged up bike that was built by Maico only here in the UK. And once more, this Maico only produced bike is made up of a selection of original and remanufactured Maico parts, but it's still in keeping with the traditional early 1970s AW Maico race bikes. But essentially it's made from a 1974 chassis that's been painted black and has a 400cc Maico motor from that same year that's been fully rebuilt to make it almost as good as you'd expect from a brand new engine. But there's certainly no mistaking the fact that this is still quite a nice rendition of one of the old school Maico race bikes of that legendary 1970s era, although I still can't help thinking that the bike would have looked maybe even better if it had been given a nice pair of polished alloy rims instead of those hideous black items that are fitted to this bike. But don't get me wrong here, I'm not suggesting for a minute that these ACR Talon alloy wheels are inferior in any way. It's just, for me personally, these black wheels just don't look right on an old twin shock classic. But of course, you'll all have to make your own mind up on that particular theory. And so as we move on to the bike's power plant, which is a 1974 400 design, but this motor again has been stripped and then rebuilt by Maico only using a combination of new old stock and remanufactured Maico engine parts. But essentially what we're looking at here is a brand new Maico motor that's not completely original, because it does have some new modern parts on it, like this Japanese Mikuni carburetor, rather than the big Bing original. But as a simple piston port two-stroke, this 400 was still a great engine and quite powerful as well, and some of the top European riders of their day, including the legendary Adolf Wheel, certainly made good use of the grunt from this big Maico motor. Now, of course, you couldn't ever have a Maico only built motocross bike without having its exhaust system all nicely chrome plated, which was always a trademark of their Maico built bikes, that they had their exhaust expansion chambers and their tailpipes all highly polished, so that you could almost see a reflection in the chrome. And although it certainly brightens up the bike and it makes it pop as if it was a show bike, which I could certainly understand, although if you're going to race the bike on a muddy racetrack, then I don't actually see the point. But nonetheless, it still looks like another quality item. Although when you take a look at the conditions that the bike was raced in its very first time out on the track, then you can see how insignificant it is to chrome plate a motocross bike's exhaust system. And this was Iain on the Maico at a very muddy Dunoon race event back in 2013. But once again, the bike's top and bottom fork yokes are billet alloy replacement parts, which, as you can see, have been very well engineered. And the front forks are basically your stock 1974 suspension units that have undergone the full refurbishment process by the guys at Maico only. Now, once again, I'm pretty sure it was around 1974 or 1975 when Maico then changed from the upright vertical rear suspensions to this angled configuration, and naturally Iain's had a pair of the very best of rear shocks fitted onto his bike with these fantastic Öhlins classic shocks, which are a massive improvement over the 74 stock originals. Now, I might be guessing here once again that this nicely polished alloy fuel tank isn't the original 74 part, but another remanufactured replica of the iconic shape of those early Adolf Wheel bikes of that 1970s era. But nevertheless, it still looks fantastic alongside all of these other brand new parts that make up this lovely Maico motorcycle. Although, having said all that, original or not, you have to admit that the Maico only guys did produce some very nice looking bikes while they were still trading here in the UK, and this example of Iain's is certainly another belter. And in fact, Iain liked his little GP400 so much that he then got Maico only to build him one of their S1 490s to accompany his GP400, and we'll take a closer look at Iain's 490 in a future episode of Mega Maicos. Okay, so just to conclude our episode 2 of Mega Maicos, we're going to take a look at something completely different and an example of just what you can create from what was an old Maico road bike initially to a machine that's now used as a budget scrambles racer. So what we're actually looking at here is a 1954 Maico 250, which, as I said, was originally a road bike, but this current owner's now converted it to use it as a classic scrambles machine. Now, this bike's never going to win any trophies at the next concourse judging contest or be given an award for the most authentic or original bike, but essentially the bike still has the 1954 Maico frame and motor, although many of the other parts on the bike have been borrowed from other different motorcycles. But as we begin with the engine, which is a 1954 Maico 2-stroke that had a 4-speed gearbox and pretty much is the same engine that powered the bike while it was on the road, but much of the other bolt-on parts, including its exhaust, etc., are all borrowed from other bikes. But the motor's carburetor is still the self-same part from the road bike engine, although the alloy airbox is a custom-made part and has a foam filter inside, when of course the road bike original would have just been a simple paper type element. But as I mentioned, a 4-speed gearbox and the clutch actuator arm on these 54 engines was at the bottom of the casing and not on the top, as per many of the later Maico race bikes of their day. But again, looking at this exhaust pipe, this could have come from a variety of any different kinds of motorcycles, and almost certainly from some kind of road bike. But again, as you can see, the bike was built on a budget, so the owner more than likely just used what he had lying around the workshop. But these forks certainly don't look like the forks that came from the 54 road bike, so again, these could very well be from some later model and not necessarily even a Maico, I might add, but these should be quite adequate for pre-1965 classic racing, as will this old school front drum that's part of the 21-inch front wheel, which again wasn't fitted to the original road bike. Now, on the other hand, this rear hub with its 18-inch wheel was said to have a rubber cush drive inside, which should be able to soak up some of the shock from dodgy gear changing or vibrations from the transmission onto that rear sprocket. Now, the fuel tank again on our 54 budget scrambler is borrowed from a 1979 Maico twin shock race bike, and this fuel cell will be just about the only thoroughbred racing part that is fitted to this bike, which very conveniently brings us onto the bike's seat, which you can see is once again custom built to suit the shape of the rider's posterior and its stature, although for me personally, I wouldn't like to slam the brakes on hard and slide forward on the seat and then bang my crown jewels on that big mounting bolt just in front of the tank, at least not before I've had a family first. But you have to say that it's certainly quite an unusual bike, and in its way a bit of a Frankenstein kind of build with all of the different parts fitted onto the bike, and what it's actually like to ride is anybody's guess, but at the end of the day, of course, my opinion counts for absolutely nothing, and it's not what I think, but what the bike's owner and builder of the machine thinks, and I'm pretty sure that he's quite proud of his little 250 Classic Racer, despite what it looks like or what it's actually made from. And if he or even she gets some enjoyment racing the bike, then who am I to criticise? But I did actually learn on the day that I took these clips that the owner still regularly uses this bike at pre-65 events, so I say well done to you and good luck, and I hope that you have more continued enjoyment with your 1954 Classic Racer. Okay, so these are the 4 bikes that you can see coming up in episode 3 of our new Mega Maico series. So again, we have some fantastic examples of the great German twin-shock racers to show you. So make sure that you retune or even subscribe to my YouTube channel in order that you don't miss out on this next episode. So once again, thank you for watching, and until next time, it's goodbye for now.